Hey, everybody, it's Scott Gaulden, and I'm joined by my special helper and co-host, Megan Haupert, and we want to welcome you to From the Ground Up, our show about autism, faith, and family. Megan, how was your week this week?
Well, I got to travel to Texas. It was
Yes, you
supposed to
did.
be warmer in Texas, and it was not, so I was very disappointed. I had this really amazing host family that let me crash at their house and fed me dessert every night, and we had great conversation. So thank you to you and your wife for hosting me.
You're so welcome.
Came back refreshed. I loved every moment of it. I got to help with bedtime, and it was awesome. It was wonderful. So
we sure had a good time, and it gave us a chance to talk a little bit about some of the shows, especially the next two shows that we're going to be doing. And one of the ideas that we had would be to we're going to talk about what's it like to be a sibling of a brother or sister that has autism. So many times we focus on the parental role, and we realize that the family is a unit, and we truly believe on this show that the family has to come together and be strong in this situation. And that's going to be affected and going to have an impact on siblings. And it's real important that we keep them involved in the conversation. So we're going to have a sibling of an autistic kid, and that autistic kid's name is Colby. And we're going to be joined by his sister, Chloe Cope. So, Chloe Cope, welcome to our show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
All of the way from Astoria, Queens, in New York City. And this is just a proud moment for me. I'm going to try to step back into the background a little bit because I'm awfully proud to have her with us. I think she's a rock star in her career and has done a great job in developing a speech practice in New York City. And we're going to get a chance to talk about what that looks like and how that could help your child with autism. So welcome to our program, Chloe.
Thank you.
Chloe, I'm so excited for you to join us. I know your dad's super, super proud, but I think it's also a compliment to your parents of what a great job they did raising you and your sister to be able to support kids in this field and the career path that you've chosen, and just to watch you grow and learn and share that knowledge, not only with other families, but with your mom and dad and your brother too. So I commend you. I really do adore y'all's family. I just think y'all are great. So I'm going to be mushy for a minute too. But Chloe, I thought it would be helpful for us to kind of hear, obviously, we know your background, but for you to share a little bit of your background growing up, what it was like having a sibling on the spectrum, how that dynamic, obviously that's kind of all you knew, but how did that dynamic impact your family as a sibling? How did you feel like your role maybe changed? And then how that kind of led to career choice and all of that?
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here tonight. Thank you for having me. Yes. As you mentioned, I am a speech therapist or a speech language pathologist. It's all the same thing. I jokingly just call myself a speech language pathologist when I want to be fancy, but I get to work with primarily kids, but on speech sound disorders, language disorders, executive functioning, feeding. There is a lot that speech therapists get to do. And that, of course, involves working with autism and those families and those kids. But as my dad mentioned, I opened my own private practice here in New York City in the fall of 2020. And just a solo practitioner, getting to work with kids every day and live here in New York with my husband, Chris.
Tell us a little bit about growing up. Tell us a little bit about what life was like as you were growing up.
And you don't have to sugarcoat it just because your dad's the host. I got your back, okay. All right?
Okay, I get it. Okay, absolutely. So I love talking about Colby, and I'm a very proud autistic sibling. So I'm happy to share all of this information. But I guess it's important to say first that just like every autistic kid is unique, every sibling's experience is going to be unique too. So I don't speak for all siblings when I share my story, but I'm happy to share my story. Colby was born when I was 9 years old, so towards the end of third grade for me. And then he was diagnosed in the middle of fifth grade. So I remember exactly where I was when my mom told me that Colby had been diagnosed with autism. I had heard some rumblings from my parents about concern, but wasn't quite sure what that meant. And whenever my mom sat me down and told me about it, it was as if time stopped. I had never heard the word autism before, but I knew it was serious and I knew it was going to change everything for our family. And it definitely did. We immediately started having therapists coming in and out of our home. We were traveling all around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex to get Colby the therapies that he needed. I would say where I felt the most immediate impacts were actually on our summer vacations, because our summers were spent pretty leisurely at home as a family, and they went from being at home and calm to having to set our alarms to wake up early to take Colby to different therapies. So there was a lot of change, and I was okay with all of that change. I love Colby and I want him to get all of the services that he needs, but it was a lot for an 11-year-old to process, especially at a time when you're entering into adolescence and you desperately want to be like everybody else. And I think it's important to remember as well that this was 2004. So this is before Autism Awareness Campaign. This is, none of my friends knew about autism. It just wasn't as commonly known. So as I'm processing all of these things, I found myself going to school to talk to my friends and my teachers about what was happening and my concerns for Colby. And they didn't know how to respond. And not that I expect a lot of empathetic listening or active listening skills from a middle schooler, but they had no context to engage in conversation with me. Yeah. None of my other friends had a special needs sibling, and we went to a private school, so there weren't any special needs kids there. So quite frankly, I felt lonely a lot of the time. There wasn't anyone to relate with what I was thinking or feeling. And there were a lot of frustrations as well. Colby had a really strict early bedtime. And so what that meant was my mom couldn't be there if I had a late soccer game or a volleyball game. And if I was acting in a play, parents were split and still felt equal love from both of them. But I wanted to share all those things with my parents the way that I saw my friends getting to share with their parents. And it was different. And of course, when Colby, we would get a lot of stares when we were in public as well. And I mean, everywhere. If we're at the grocery store or the restaurants or movie theaters, people are staring. And it was embarrassing when Colby would have a meltdown, and quite frankly, just would feel helpless because there wasn't a way we didn't really know what to do. So all that to say, I don't want to try to over dramatize my story. And I do think it's important to share and be honest and raw about it. But I also wanted to share I never saw Colby as a burden. I have always loved him deeply and have a really strong personal relationship. But I do think it's important to share the realities of what it's like to be a sibling.
Chloe, one of the challenges I have as a dad sometimes is I don't see the perspective of what it was like growing up. To some extent, your mom and I were just kind of doing the best we could with what we had. What would it have been helpful for us to know as parents while you were going through that? What do you think maybe we were missing or that we might not have known that we should have known or would have been helpful to know?
That's kind of a hard, okay. Hindsight is 20/20. So I can verbalize all this much better now than I could back then. It wasn't like I was fully aware of those feelings of loneliness or frustration.
What would have been important for us to know, or what do you feel like maybe we didn't know about what you were going through, or how could we have maybe helped you better when you were going through this? How could we have supported you better as parents during this time?
I think you maybe could have shared more about your experiences of grief in those current moments. I think that our family's response to it at the time in those early years of diagnosis was to just be as hopeful as, and there's a lot of optimism about we can solve this, we can cure this, we're gonna be strong in this together. And so I do think if you were able to acknowledge your own grief and discuss that grief with me, I maybe would have been able to process that grief a little bit earlier, and I could have been more of an open dialogue about that. I think that could have been helpful.
Okay.
But as the only other thing I would say is that just trying to be as present as possible as if there wasn't autism. I don't know what it's like to be a parent, so I don't know exactly how realistic that is, but yeah.
I hope you get to share that experience in the not too distant future. Let's just say that. Okay?
Your parents are going to make amazing grandparents, and I fully support this.
I want to go to this, but I'm just
Calm
throwing it out
down.
there, okay?
I knew it was going to happen eventually.
Okay.
Chloe, I have a question. Do you think it would have helped if your parents, and maybe they did, share your brother's diagnosis, maybe your teachers or the parents of your friends, just to have more of a community? I think about sometimes when we have a child that's maybe diagnosed with cancer or some sort of illness, we kind of share that with teachers, and we share that with those close people that are around that child. I think this is a very similar situation because there's a grieving process that goes along with this as well. And maybe more people that would know about it can help kind of support versus your teachers maybe being caught off guard, or those close to you are kind of trying to bounce this off of and process through knowing, and then they could have at least kind of helped to guide those conversations with you.
Yeah, I think that would have been really wonderful. I think, and I don't even know if this is the same kind of experience people are having now just because more people know about autism, but I remember when I was in 7th grade, I was in a speech class, and I decided to give like a 5 to 10 minute speech. I think we could choose any topic, and I chose to talk about autism and explain some of that to the kids in my class and to my teacher. And having an opportunity to share and help educate, creating a space for Colby to enter into the conversation was so important because there wasn't a space for him in so much of my childhood. So yeah, talking to teachers, bringing him into that conversation, creating a space for him, anything like that would have helped me, because I do think a big part of my identity is being Colby's sister, is being an autistic sister. And if there's not any type of avenues to explore that, then it's just a hidden part of you.
Chloe, do you feel like that, because our show's about faith and family as well as autism, do you feel like there was a point at which maybe your faith was affected by any of this, or was there any point at which it may have either matured or not? How do you think it affected your faith?
Definitely, it fully impacted my faith. Colby's diagnosis never caused me to doubt the existence of God, but it has fully formed my faith in many other rich ways. I do feel like I read the words of Jesus. I have a different understanding of the words of Jesus because of Colby. You can't read about the last shall be first without a little bit differently because of the experiences that I've had. I do think of one experience in particular where someone told me if I had more faith that Colby would be cured in the morning, and quoted the story of Jesus where he heals a mute boy. And Colby was still autistic in the morning. And I, to this day, can't read Mark 9, the story that they quoted because of that. So it is one of those instances where I didn't question God, but it made me understand early on that humans are really bad spokespeople for God at times.
Amen.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great
I can be one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were a lot of messages people had regarding faith that I would hear growing up that were impactful. I would say as well that mentioning those feelings of loneliness and frustration, there was not a setting that I felt it more strongly than when we were at church. And I know that my dad has mentioned on this podcast before about his church, The Hills, and the wonderful special needs ministry that they have. But that was not available at our church when I was there growing up. So what that meant was there were times, there was a year or so when I babysat Colby so my mom could sit in service. And when we got older and that no longer worked, we would all go to service, but we would sit in the top right corner off on our own. And usually Colby couldn't sit for the whole time. So him and my parents would leave early, but I would want to listen to the end of the sermon. So I would sit in the pew by myself. And looking down at all of my other friends and family sitting together, I longed for us to have that experience together as a family. And I was incredibly mad and frustrated that there wasn't a space for Colby to be a full participant in our church. And I'm so glad that's not the case now. And I think that anyone who knows Colby at church has, their lives are for the better because they know him and get to experience the kingdom with him in it. But that I know that this is a very common story for a lot of families with autism, is that they don't have a space in the church.
Or you have to change your life to make it work some way. It's not necessarily an easy, it takes a real commitment to be there, more than people I think appreciate. So it's not easy. So I appreciate you sharing that. In fact, that's something I didn't know that I'm glad I got a chance to know a little bit more about. So thank you. How about your career, Chloe? Because obviously this has impacted your career, because I'm sure that this may impact other families as well, that they may have children that kind of go into some of the caring professions because they've been exposed to these careers in their life.
Yeah. There's obviously a big connection between the job that I chose and the background that I had. Although I do wonder if I would have chosen speech therapy regardless of Colby. I had a big drawing toward the helping professions, and I didn't want to be a classroom teacher, so it might have happened. We don't know. Actually, my mom was one of the biggest supporters in me going into speech therapy, saying that I had a natural intuition towards the work. I guess when I would be off at school during the day and she would take Colby to therapy, and the therapist afterwards would give her suggestions, recommendations to support him at home. And I would come home and start naturally doing them with him without having been told. So she sat me down kind of early, was like, you need to do therapy. I was most interested in doing occupational therapy because they look like they were having the most fun and just pushing kids on swings. And maybe they still do have the most fun. I don't know. And this is a silly reason, but part of the reason I chose speech therapy is the university I wanted to go to didn't have a fully accredited occupational therapy program at the time. But all that being said, I am so glad I chose speech therapy. If I could go back, I would do it all over again. I'm so fascinated by the field. And the more and more I learn about speech and language, the more fascinated I am that any of us can do it. So yeah, I love this.
Tell us a little bit about what your education was like as a speech therapist.
I went into undergrad to get my degree in communication sciences and disorders. And while I was still in undergrad, an opportunity came up for one of my professors by BCBA in town, asking if one of the students would want to be trained in doing ABA therapy. I was obviously very familiar with it because of Colby and decided, yeah, this would be great. And this would be a wonderful part-time job. Why not get some experience with it? So I loved having that early experience with some therapy and got to relate some of the things I was learning about in class to the kids that I was working with and get some more tools in my tool belt. Doing therapy is such a specific skill, and the only way to get better at it is to practice at it. So I got to have some early exposure there. But I went straight from my undergrad into my graduate work. And graduate work takes about 2 years before you go off and do a fellowship year and get your license. And got to have a lot of different experiences in my grad work. We would do a different setting every semester. So I got to work in an outpatient clinic and in an adult rehab center and an oncologist clinic and at a school. And over the summer, I got to spend 6 weeks in Zambia getting to do some swallowing therapy and language enrichment for the kids at an orphanage that were there. It was a program that was connected with Harding University. And so I got to go with a lot of their graduate students to do this program. So I got to have a really well-rounded experience before going off and doing my own licensed work.
Pretty incredible, don't you think, Megan?
I mean, I'm speechless, really. Like, where'd you work? I'm like, Indiana and Texas, United States. Didn't go anywhere fancy.
She came home and I said, so where are you going to do your internship this year? I'm going to go to Zambia. I'm going to be out in the middle of nowhere working with orphanage kids.
I remember your mom telling me about that. Yeah. She was so excited, but you could just tell, like, in her voice, like, oh, I'd much rather her be here, working here.
Well, and as part of the exchange, Chloe, and you can talk a little bit about this, Chloe, but you actually got to go out into the hinterlands because the workers that they would have come in to work with the children lived a lot of times in villages that were, hour and 2 hour walks. And so for at least one of the weekends, she went out. How far did you have to walk?
Probably 2 hours there. That's a good question. I've kind of blocked that out. But yeah, we went far out there and there was a host family. One of the women that worked in orphanage hosted me and some of the other graduate students in their home for a weekend. And so we got to have a more authentic experience of what it was like to live in Zambia and eat their food and go to the market with them and go to church with them. And that was the longest church service of my entire life. Wow. Talk about differences. But yeah, there was one evening where we went, just kept going out, and out, and we're on a flat rock observing all the stars in the sky. I've never seen so many stars. So it was so much more than a graduate placement. It was a once in a lifetime kind of experience.
Well, Chloe, do you have any advice that you would give families that have a recent diagnosis and in terms of here's the things that you might want to do? And then maybe we also talk about specifically, here's how much you might want to handle telling your other children or discussing this within your family.
I think in terms of sitting down with your children, the more information, the better. And I know that's going to depend on your child and what they're wanting to learn more about. But I think one of the best things you can do is make space for your autistic child in the siblings world and space for the sibling in your autistic child's world. It was difficult at times to go with Colby to all these therapies, but I got to see him. I got to see him excelling. I got to understand what he was doing throughout the day. I still have an idea of what my brother's childhood was because I came along to all those things. If I was off at my own day camp and Colby was off doing his own thing, I wouldn't have an understanding of who he is. So I do think it's important for you to show the siblings what's going on, in addition to educating them and giving them more information. And maybe not all kids would be like this, but when I was going along to those therapies, I was asking therapists questions. What's that? What are you doing? What is the sign for this? And so they can learn a lot just by observing, and maybe they'll show interest as well. I would also highly recommend that if the sibling is interested, ask the therapist if there is a way that the sibling can join into the sessions, that not just observing, but creating an activity where they can be together in that, especially if you can ask the therapist if they could work on language that can be used in the home with the sibling, or work on an activity or some play skills that can be translated at home with the sibling to help the sibling and the child continue to foster their relationship. I do have, as I mentioned before, a very deep personal relationship with Colby, but he was in therapy for a lot of his childhood. And when he would come home from therapy, he was tired. And the point of your child being in therapy is not just so that they can learn and check off boxes, it's so that they can be a more active participant in their daily life, in their daily routines. And so if they're not working in therapy to support the child's skills in order to be with their siblings and with their parents and their family, then I would seriously recommend having a conversation with that therapist or trying to foster that in any way, because the sibling's going to be there for the child's whole life. Not to be dark, but one day the hope is that my parents will go first. And when that day comes, Chelsea and I are ready and excited to support Colby in whatever way that he needs. It's not a burden, it's an honor. And I feel that way because we have that connection. So I would work on that relationship as much as possible.
Chloe, I could not agree with you more from a therapist standpoint and implementing with the siblings, because you can do parent training, you can work with parents all day, every day, but let's be honest, kids keep us honest. And having the kids there to be able to, hey, mom, remember we worked on this, and they're doing it naturally throughout the day with the child and interacting with the child, that gives them purpose, it gives them drive as well. And I totally agree, it builds that relationship. So I appreciate you so much sharing your story and sharing your knowledge and experience. I love hearing it. I could listen to y'all talk all day about Colby and your family. I really could.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
I'm just going to sit here and cry a little bit more. So you guys just keep talking. Okay. I got to get rid of the tears for a moment.
Man, you totally lucked out, Scott. Do you know how lucky you are? I mean,
Megan, you have no idea. You've only seen the surface of the blessings that I've been given. Seriously. I mean, it's really incredible. And I'm just so thankful that my children don't take after me. It really has been great. Sweetheart, I love the idea of keeping the kids involved in the therapy. And the thing that you identified is the whole purpose of therapy is to have the child be blended in with the rest of the family. And if that's not happening, there's a problem. Mm-hmm. So, gosh, if you're a mom or dad that's listening to this right now, take that advice. That's going to be worth that's worth the time it took you to listen to the show. If that's the only thing you walk away from this, is let's use therapy to make the family come together even stronger. So that's beautiful. I love that. Chloe, if people wanted to get in touch with you and talk to you about therapy, what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, so they can look me up on my website. My business name is Cope Speech Therapy. So my website is copespeechtherapy.com, very simple. Or you can look me up on socials. I'm at Cope Speech Therapy. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram.
And Megan, how do we get in contact with you?
You can check me out at haupertconsulting.com and also follow me on Facebook or Instagram at Haupert Consulting. So, Scott, you want to talk a little bit about the Hills and what they're offering right now for our families of children with special needs?
Absolutely. We're actually starting a class. By the time you see this, it's probably going to already be started. But we're going to have another class in the fall, and that is we're going to have a Prepare and Enrich Your Marriage class that's strictly parents of special needs kids. It's about a 8-week program. There's different modules that we go through each week. We'll have childcare available for that, because the key is we want to be a resource for helping you maintain strong marital relationships while you're walking along this path. And so if you have an interest in that, if you'll contact me, I'll make sure that you get on the list for our class in the fall, because the spring class will have already started by the time that you get a chance to hear this. And as well, I'd like to invite you, if you're in North Texas and are looking for a church home, we would love to have you come to the Hills. We have 3 different campuses, one in West Fort Worth, one in North Richland Hills, one in Keller. We have a special needs ministry that was very welcoming to your special needs child. We have a respite night once a month at each one of the campuses. We've got special programs, and we even have some like small group situations for them. So if you're looking for a church home and you just don't feel like where you are right now is meeting your needs, we would love it if you would come and visit us. And please contact me. I'll put you in contact with the right people there.
Yes, and if you guys liked this episode, we would love for you to follow us and subscribe on our YouTube channel so you can get every time we launch a new episode. If you share it with your friends, we'd like to be able to reach other families so that we can bless them with what we feel is helpful and beneficial knowledge and information to get out there. So appreciate you guys listening. We look forward to you catching us on our next episode, where we may have Miss Chloe talking a little bit more about some new and novel approaches for kids with autism. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and we are excited for you to tune into our next episode.
Thanks for being here.